With Jufufu and Yidhari's banners approaching, Banyue and Dialyn's additional reveal adds even more options and confusion over who to pull for. With no confirmation on reruns yet in 2.4 and a new meta of Rupture DPS on the horizon, every pull could be game-changing. So in today's video, we'll be breaking down Jufufu, Yidhari, Dialyn, and Banyue to help you decide where your pulls should go. And as always, if you found today's video helpful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But first, a moment from today's sponsor, Lootbar. Anyone who plays ZenlessZoneZero knows just how quickly top-ups can eat into your wallet, but never fear, as that's where Lootbar comes into play. This is an alternative option that lets you grab the same in-game packs from Zenless at a cheaper price, but let's actually talk about Lootbar and the homepage specifically. This is a top-up platform that supports titles like Genshin Impact, ZenlessZoneZero, and even Honkai Star Rail, and navigation through the site is very straightforward, simple, and it's also familiar as it mirrors the in-game store. Now once you click into ZenlessZoneZero though, you'll see the savings right away. Lootbar offers up to 23% cheaper prices than the in-game shop, and if you're signing up for the first time, you'll also unlock a special 10% off coupon that makes your first purchase even more affordable. Now in terms of the price comparison, you'll see that the same pack in-game costs noticeably more, while on Lootbar you're paying less for the exact same thing. The difference here may seem small at first of course, but over time this can really start to add up. Now in terms of its usage, Lootbar isn't just about saving money, it's also something used by many members across the community. On top of this, they cover 5% tax, offer 7-day after purchase services, and only require your ID to recharge. Now, when you purchase through Lootbar, this is also a pretty quick and simple process. Just enter your ID, choose the pack you want, and confirm your order. Delivery is fast too, and most recharges are completed in about 30 minutes or less. But with this guys, if you want to recharge in ZenlessZoneZero while paying less, Lootbar is the way to do it. It's quick, affordable, and used by many in the community. Click on the link now in the description or comments though to start saving today, and don't forget, new users get a 10% off coupon, so what are you waiting for? Thanks again to Lootbar for sponsoring today's video though. Now let's start with the first of, again, probably many disclaimers. This video is not a definitive must-follow guide, and as a result, you of course can pull whoever you like. That said, today's video will have clearly laid out reasons for why you may lean towards one choice or another. For example, the Yidhari is naturally more appealing when you consider the fact that a lot of current and upcoming bosses will be Rupture focused or likely skewed so that Yidhari will do well against them. As a result, if you don't already have Miyabi, or if you're fighting one of the bosses that has anti-Miyabi tech built into their fights, these can definitely feel tougher than they should be. However, these advantages still need proper context, since not every piece of content revolves around the need for someone like Yidhari, or even requires any more than just enough points to claim all Primo Gems for the week. As a result, Yidhari offers less priority if your main objective is simply hitting 20,000 points in Deadly Assault, or just reaching S-rank Shiyu to grab all the available rewards. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves though, I'd like to include another warning though. Since we're discussing upcoming characters like Dialyn and Banyue, keep in mind that their kits aren't known and likely still being adjusted/tweaked. As a result, much of what will be talked about in today's video will have to do with what we officially known from their teasers and in-game appearances, unless otherwise stated as a speculation. With that out of the way though, let's kick things off by taking a closer look at Yidhari and her value to a team. Now though this isn't a full breakdown of Yidhari's kit, there are a few important things that we need to highlight about her. First, her gameplay revolves around charging her basic by sacrificing her own HP, and this upgrades her basic attack by up to 3 stages based on how long you hold the button. This does make her feel similar to someone like Piper, though as players have tested her more and more, it's clear that she doesn't necessarily spend the same amount of time whirling like a tornado. In terms of relevant details for the rest of her kit, her core skill is incredibly powerful, granting 100% increased damage, 30% increased crit damage, and 25% damage reduction so long as she stays below 50% health. Regarding the rest of her kit, including her EX special, this is actually a pretty cool ability that changes depending on the conditions of when she uses it. Following this, her ultimate also deals a pretty crazy amount of damage, but truthfully, she plays about as a high DPS damage dealer. For her build, she'll be using the Yunquei tail set with Yixuan or Monado if you already have either of them geared, which actually makes building Yidhari pretty easy, as you'd otherwise just have to swap out any element damage 5th slot to match her actual attribute. When it comes to her value though, everything mentioned earlier about her place in ZenlessZoneZero still holds true. If you need an ice DPS or simply love her design, she's an absolutely reasonable character to pull for. Now, even though the game has reached the point where DPS units constantly share roles and team function, there are still two very important questions regarding Yidhari. Is her damage or utility strong enough to replace or compete with someone like Ellen, Hugo, or Miyabi? And even if she does edge them out, is she worth potentially spending your pity on? Let's break this down. When it comes to damage, Yidhari is especially powerful in the current Deadly Assault and general endgame modes. To add to this, her known self-buffing is on par with or stronger than some of the other limited ice DPS in the game. Even when comparing to other characters though, like Minato and Yishuen, Yidhari also has bosses or deadly assault buffs that skew specifically to her for the time being, and as a result, Yidhari will look equally if not significantly stronger than Yishuen and Minato, especially once they inevitably change the buffs to favor her specifically. That said, even when trying to account for these biases and trying to assess her more fairly, Yidhari's kit and design still suggest that her damage and overall performance will be on the higher side since she's both easier to play and has access to many damage steroids even just within her kit. Pair this with several powerful rupture supports in the mix, and Yidhari is clearly set to shine as the newest and most powerful DPS for this upcoming rupture rotation. Now when it comes to pity value, there's no single right answer though. Some players will pull if an agent feels smoother or offers better damage, and in this case I'd actually find Yidhari to feel as smooth or better than a DPS like Dailyn, and DPS wise, this is of course a bit preemptive as we aren't entirely sure about what her official numbers look like, but even in terms of straightforwardness in gameplay, she does feel similar to that of Hugo, who shares a stun and then unload all of your DPS playstyle. The tough question here, however, is whether this is actually worth several $100s worth of pulls, as the character may only offer a DPS upgrade and otherwise questionable value in terms of future-proofing or adding something like utility to a team in the future. There's also the question of whether it's really worth pulling for a character just because the content is designed specifically for them. We've already seen players handle the Wandering Hunter with other Ice DPS or Rupture agents, proving that the newest release isn't always required, and ultimately it does feel unfortunate to pull for a character to then bench them in a few months if the Deadly Assault doesn't suit them for one reason or another. Now let's talk about Jufufu though. At her core, she's an Aftershock focused off-field stunner, and her core passive doesn't just grant a team-wide crit damage buff for up to 50%, it also increases the team's chain attack and ultimate damage by 20% and 40% respectively, while granting her an extra 50 impact during her enhanced state. Her additional ability is also pretty impactful since it restores 300 decibels after every ultimate, and this also increases the decibel cap to 4000, which is actually pretty nice, especially if you're using a character that does use their ultimate pretty frequently. Now regarding Jufufu, this definitely seems to be one of the most controversial and most talked about characters in the space as of late. Some see Jufufu's value as a general stunner, and others appreciate the value of her synergy with non-attack scaling agents like Yishuen, Minato, or likely Yidhari. That said, there are those who don't appreciate or find that Jufufu is kind of overrated, as it doesn't feel like she's the perfect fit for any single character yet, and otherwise to this, she's just being used for her non-attack related buffs and the fact that she can sometimes apply impact from off-field. This leads me to my findings on the character, which is that honestly, she's definitely not a bad support slash stunner slash utility character, but at the same time, she's definitely not OP either. And though I know some feel the need to definitively call her an OP or overrated stunner, she's really neither of these options. From her performance in recent Deadly Assaults, you'd be right to call her one of the strongest utility slash support options, but at the same time, you'd also be right in noting that the new supports like Lucia or the Deadly Assault Rupture buffs make basically any lineup, including Lucia and a Rupture DPS, easily yield numbers in the 35 to 40,000 range in Deadly Assault. This brings us to her pull value. Since Jufufu isn't just a stunner and her ability to act as a team buffer actually increases her usefulness, there's a very reasonable argument towards pulling for her, especially since her buffs are general and work with basically any non-anomaly agent. In addition to this, even when accounting for her stun application, Jufufu's value is also pretty high as well, since she does allow you to stun from off-field. That said, for those still afraid of future stunners or new support agents who could take away Jufufu's current spot as a utility agent on a Rupture lineup, I have good news for you too. With Yidhari's release, Zenless is very likely to release another boss lineup where 2 Rupture-based teams will ideally be played, and as a result, Jufufu will still find value at least on one of these teams, as it's still too early to replace Jufufu as the second best Rupture stunner at the very minimum. On top of this, with the release of the newest endgame mode, Threshold Simulation, ZenlessZoneZero is also implementing an activity where having even more than 3 teams can be helpful, especially when trying to juggle several teams, buffs, and bosses for each stage. Even so, while there are teams that can benefit from the extra value and damage Jufufu provides, that alone might not be enough to convince everyone. After all, there are new characters on the horizon, and this might be less than satisfactory for your pulling standards. Now let's talk about Dialyn. There really isn't enough concrete information yet to give a full breakdown of her kit, though her planned release in the next version definitely raises the question, is she going to be better than all the other stunners before her? While nothing is confirmed, being the first limited physical stunner raises a few notable theories and questions about her role. She could end up as an off-field stunner like Jufufu or Trigger, or she could also be a stunner like Lighter slash Qingyi and stay on field, or provide a unique effect like increasing the physical damage that her allies deal, or even better yet, she might also just increase stun duration. Ultimately though, her physical element already suggests that she'll likely be a strong stun applier though, as even a character like Caesar can daze enemies pretty decently despite not being a dedicated daze character. This is also partially because of Caesar's strong defensive assists, and the fact that she scales off of impact, but it's worth mentioning that the physical attribute itself, as a reminder, does allow enemies to be stunned quicker when affected by a physical anomaly. When combining this element then with a role that actually wants to focus on dazing instead of being a defense agent, it's fair to assume there's a chance she'll be one of the fastest stun appliers in the game. That said, keep in mind that this is more of a theory based on the evidence of her element and the way that physical attributes function in game. Now, beyond guessing at what her kit will actually do though, it's also worth considering when Dialyn is being released timeline wise. Though it's clear that we're in the middle of a rupture focused period, Dialyn and Banyue may very well be at the end of the rupture bias cycle, since we otherwise would have been in a rupture based period for quite a long time. As a result, it wouldn't surprise me if she ends up being a good support for anomalies or attack agents, as adding yet another rupture exclusive utility unit seems kind of excessive, especially after how good Lucia is. Of course, there is no hard evidence to suggest this specifically, but as Zenless has been pretty straightforward with the way that they market or tease characters, and since it also wasn't too difficult to initially guess that Lucia would be a good fit with the other character in her version banner, I'd say that this isn't too unrealistic. As a side note, it is also worth mentioning that Dialyn's release will line up with the typical pattern of releasing a drive disc set every other patch, and with this release, there is also the potential for her being even stronger, as most characters who do receive their own specific set are quite powerful as far as the history of Zenless. As a final note for the section though, it is also worth mentioning that Lucia was guessable as the rupture equivalent of Astra, since we already had an Astra tier character for anomalies with Yuzuha, but I would still caution players from making any hard calls, as again, nothing is confirmed yet, and I'd wait until the next upcoming live stream. Now onto Banyue. Details on his kit are pretty minimal, but from what we've seen so far, he seems to operate like a standard DPS with the rupture tag slapped on. That said, the fact that he is a rupture fire character already makes him seem like a strong and reliable option out of the gate, with a couple of clear advantages and controversy honestly alongside it. To address the quote-unquote controversy, if you could even call it that, it does feel slightly weird for him to be released right after Monado, who in reality should share the same role as him, and as a result, though both are likely viable with how strong the current buffs are for rupture agents, it does feel kind of weird for them to have released a Monado 2 in basically less than a patch. Now, while we do still need the full kit reveal to truly gauge his strength, simply being a rupture agent already gives him value, especially in the current endgame cycle. Aside from just being a decent option against enemies with the miasmic mechanics, however, it is also worth mentioning that we did see him briefly in-game as a semi-assist type agent, and though this doesn't directly spoil what his kit or gameplay will look like, it's safe to say that his role as a DPS will probably feature high field time and lots of damage. Finally, just like with Dailyn, he could also receive a signature drive disc set, but even if this doesn't end up being the case, he'll still likely share a set with characters like Yixuan, Yidhari, and Monado, and otherwise you'll just have to replace his 5th slot with the proper element tuned to fire, or his 6th slot being something different if he ends up avoiding HP scaling. At the end of all this, however, I'm sure the question that you're all dying to know is who would actually be worth pulling for, or who is worth skipping. The unfortunate truth, however, as I've mentioned extensively in each section, is that it really depends on your team, and some factors we just have to wait and see on. That said, let's go over what we know officially and briefly touch on each character once again. For Yidhari, if you're missing a source of ice damage on your team, and if you've already picked up Lucia, this combo is almost guaranteed to do well on any account. Though this is debatably just because of how strong Lucia is currently, early testing even with just the endgame threshold simulation they've shown us on the live server is resulting in very respectable scores from Yidhari specifically. With this, I could definitely see Yidhari being worthwhile, especially for non-Miyabi owners, but for those with Miyabi or for those who skip to Lucia, Yidhari may not be the most valuable character for your account. For Jufufu, if you're looking to currently improve your rupture team's performances, she's a very good option, especially with who's currently released. Her damage increases aren't exclusively based on element or attack, and even for those who believe Dialyn may end up being the best rupture-based stunner in the game, Jufufu will likely still play a role as the second best stunner for rupture agents otherwise. That said, if you want to be extra safe with Jufufu, you can also just wait until the next live stream comes around, as there's a high chance they'll reveal Dialyn's kit and gameplay premise, which will give a better idea of how good she actually is. On that topic, and regarding Dailyn and Banyue together, the two are really the most unpredictable at the moment, as we really don't know much of what their role or gameplay will look like. Regardless of the small teasers, element reveals, or short gameplay footage from in-game, the final role and performance of these characters will really depend on what they show us in the upcoming live stream, and as we've even seen with a character like Orphe, sometimes this isn't even reliable, as they do end up changing things anyways. Realistically though, there's a high chance that Banyue will do equal to or more damage than Monado, and otherwise, Dailyn will likely end up finding her own specialized team / role, or maybe she'll end up being the best stunner in the entire world. Who knows? We just have to wait and see. At the end of it all though, guys, each of these characters offer their own strengths, and the best choice ultimately comes down to what your account needs and what you're personally looking to improve improve on. As always, make sure to go with what feels right for you, and feel free to leave a comment about what you're planning on doing with all these new characters coming out soon. But that's all for today's video. Thanks again for watching, stay safe, stay healthy, good night, and good luck with your pulls.